Hello and welcome to Really Cool People, a podcast produced by Schweitzer Church. I'm your host, Jason Leininger. This is a place to hear stories of really cool people. And the hope is that as you and I listen, we'll be inspired, encouraged, and challenged through moments of serendipity. In a sermon entitled The Weight of Glory, C.S. Lewis said, "There are no ordinary people. You have never talked to a mere mortal." It's my joy over the next few moments to introduce you to somebody who may seem rather ordinary, especially to themselves, and yet they're a really cool person. Today, we're going to meet Cassie Rainwater. She's going to talk about being born in Virginia, moving around quite a bit over the course of her life, both as a kid and as an adult. She's going to talk about her early childhood, being the child of somebody who's in the U.S. Navy. And then as an adult, she served and lived as somebody who's been married to a pastor. So she'll describe what that's like. I invite you to take a moment to lean in and listen to Cassie's story. Cassie, it's great to have you in studio today. So let's start with your story.
Thanks for having me, Jason.
Yeah.
I appreciate the opportunity to be here. So, I was born in the spring of 1968 in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania. And actually, I was brought home in a banana box that my dad had jerry-rigged for our vehicle. This was back in the time before there were car seats, and my dad was very safety conscious. And so he was a Navy pilot at the time at the Philadelphia Naval Station, and my mother was a housewife and a mother. She was taking care of my older sister and I. I don't really have much of a memory of Philadelphia because shortly after I was born, we actually moved to San Diego, California. My dad was stationed out there. He was deployed to be a helicopter pilot during the Vietnam War. And so I was so young when he was deployed that I really did not recognize him when he returned home from the Vietnam War. So anyways, but
How old were you when you returned home?
I think we moved out to San Diego, California, like when I was about 3 months old. And I would say Dad's tours were usually like 9 months at a time. So I'm thinking, I was around 2.
Okay.
Or a little bit younger. So, yeah.
Do you remember not recognizing him?
No, and that's
Okay.
something that my parents have,
Yeah.
my mom has always
right.
said to me.
I was also going to ask if you remember being brought home in a banana box.
I
mean,
don't
that's a
remember that
fascinating
story either.
Yeah.
No, but it doesn't surprise me because my dad was like always inventing things.
Uh-huh.
There were cup holders in our cars before car manufacturers made them. And he had wheels on backpacks before the manufacturers did, So anyways, but we only lived in San Diego, California for a short time too, because I don't really have much of a memory of that. I mean, if I do, it's associated with a picture like I was a baby and we were at Disneyland and Winnie the Pooh was with me and my sister and that kind of a thing. So really our next home was in Norfolk, Virginia, where my dad worked at the safety center on base, and we lived nearby in Virginia Beach. And so this is where my earliest memories really begin. I remember that my bedroom was all purple. Purple was my favorite color, so I had purple walls, purple rug, purple bedspread. But it was also a place where I just had a lot of wonderful memories with my family. And so I can remember playing in the attic with my sister while my dad was down below working in the garage, and he'd let us go up there and just play house in the attic, And then we used to have a camper, and we'd go camping, but there were times that my dad would, set it up out in the driveway and let us sleep out in the driveway overnight. And so he'd have his German Shepherd tied to the front door of the camper, and he'd be sleeping just inside the house. But we just thought it was such a big treat to be out there all by ourselves.
That's awesome.
And camp in the driveway.
Is your sister older?
She is.
Okay.
Yeah, she's 3 years older than I am. So one of the things I was going to share was that one of my strongest memories of that time was a night that my brother was born. My sister and I were 12 and 9 at the time. And I think it's such a strong memory because my dad, being military, was always very orderly, very controlled, and very calm. In fact, he used to say to me, you never have to worry unless you see me start to worry. Mm-hmm. And I took that to heart, But on that night that my brother was born, we both saw a very different side of my father as he anxiously hustled us off to our neighbors and called, I think, the ambulance 4 times that night. But really, basically after one wild ride, my brother was delivered basically upon reaching the hospital. I think after the first 2, my dad knew my mother delivered quickly, and that was probably why he was a little panicked and anxious that night. So, but it was definitely a different side of seeing him. So anyways, after 20 years with the Navy, Dad retired from the military. And so he went to work for Tennessee Valley Authority in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And that's really where I consider home, because I went to junior high and high school there, and I started at UT Chattanooga. So it was during my teenage years that I gave my life to Christ at a youth conference in Gatlinburg. I was like 8th grade, I think. But when I think about the time that we spent in Chattanooga, and if I had to describe it in a few words, I'd say that family and church were at the center of everything that we did. Family especially became more important to me. We had a grandmother living with us for many years until her death. And for someone that had never lived near extended family, that was pretty cool to me to have her live with us for those 7 years. So, and then during that time, my mother also faced major surgery, heart surgery, that we were very concerned about. It was a concerning time for all of us. So, but I remember our pastor sitting with us during the whole 6 hours of her quadruple bypass surgery, which I thought was astounding that he took the time to stay with us. And the pastor also did a beautiful job when my grandmother passed of just, describing her life at the funeral and things like that. So I think with those experiences of my grandmother living with us and my mother's surgery and things like that, that just, family became really important to me. So after we were probably, in Chattanooga, I started 7th grade there, and I moved the junior of my junior year of college. So we were there for a long time. But after that, my dad was still working with Tennessee Valley Authority at the time, but he transferred. They were having so many reductions in force at the headquarters office in Chattanooga that he transferred out to Allen Steam Plant. And so we lived in Memphis, Tennessee. And that's where I graduated from the University of Memphis with an applied math degree. So a degree in applied mathematics. So that's my growing up years.
So let me, let's just go back and unpack a couple things about life in Chattanooga there. At that time, I think Gatlinburg was like undergoing this significant boom, right? And that part of East Tennessee was undergoing this significant boom time?
I would suspect so, but I don't know that I could answer anything to that. Yeah.
Well, then, it's just interesting that you said you gave your life to Christ at a camp over in Gatlinburg. It's like there's a lot of people going to Gatlinburg for a lot of different things, and
it's a beautiful area. I, at the time, was active in my own youth group, but I actually was also active with the youth group of a friend of mine. And it was his church that invited me to go. And they were the ones that really introduced me in reading the Bible and memorizing scripture and, it just really becoming personal. And I just remember it was we stayed at the Roundhouse, the Sheraton Roundhouse in Gatlinburg, which is still there. I don't think it's owned by Sheraton anymore. But when I go back and I see it, because it's just this tall tower that's all round, and it just is an icon to me, and it just reminds me of my commitment to Christ. But I just remember that evening going to the youth pastor's room with his wife and talking to them and just, being emotional and shaking. And I was like, okay, I think I'm ready to make this decision and explore what this is all about. So, yeah.
How was that received when you got back home?
Oh, very well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. My parents were raised in the Methodist church. They raised us in the Methodist church.
Mm-hmm.
So they were very supportive. Yeah. They had us in church every Sunday.
Yeah.
So they were very supportive.
Then what was it like to have your grandma living with you for 7 years? Like, I mean, you talked about it, like, and it was very good, but like, you have any distinct, unique memories from that time?
My grandmother, yes, I do. The things that come to my mind would be things like I loved coming home from church and she'd have soup and biscuits made for us. She made a real special corned beef hash that I loved, or vegetable soup. And of course, my mom appreciated it with 3 kids and coming home from church that lunch was ready on the table. Of course, I was a teenager, so emotions were like all over the place. And I can remember sitting at the dinner table one night and she was upset and my mom was trying to find out why she was upset. And she looked at me and she's like, well, Cassie's sitting over there staring daggers at me. I just remember that phrase so much. And I'm like, me? What did I do? Probably just one of my moods. It had nothing to do with her, but my grandmother took it very personally, So I can remember evenings that we'd have boyfriends home, and we'd want to spend time alone with them. But here's grandma in her recliner with her buttermilk seasoned with Mrs. Dash and her Cheetos, and she's watching her television and she's nodding off in the chair, and we're like, Grandma, don't you want to go on to bed? Oh, I'm too tired to go upstairs. I don't know if she was a plant by mom and dad or what, but it worked. But no, I mean, my grandfathers were deceased. My mom's dad died when she was 14, had the same heart conditions that my mom and my brother and my sister have. But my dad's dad died probably when I was 2 or 3. So I never knew my grandfathers. And we never lived near my grandmother's, really. So it was always, especially from Virginia Beach, a long drive to get back up to Maryland, where my parents were from. So, yeah, I just treasured having extended family in the house. I got to know that grandmother a whole lot better than I did my dad's mom, just for that reason.
Did you ever have girlfriends over and grandma get in the middle of stuff?
No, not
the
so.
boyfriends?
I mean, we had girlfriends over, of course, yes. But no, that particular grandmother, my mom's mom that lived with us, she was real big on playing games, and she was real big on going camping with us. And so, I enjoyed those times. Yeah. She was a neat lady. Died too early.
Grandmothers are awesome.
They are awesome. So, all right. Well, later on in life.
Yeah, let's keep going with the story.
Later on in life. All right. Well, Brian and I have been married 34 years past December. He was actually my brother-in-law's first roommate at Asbury Seminary. So I blame my sister and my brother-in-law. I can remember Brian coming down to visit with Roland one time to see my sister. And I came down from doing homework upstairs, and I just kind of said hi and met him, and I just went right back upstairs. I was seeing somebody else at the time. And, we were both in my sister's wedding, and I remember us sitting at the same table together with Roland's brother and my cousin. And it's so funny to watch the video because we're like not hardly even talking to each other. I'm talking to my cousin, he's talking to Roland's brother, and there's nothing. But then later that summer, after they got married, they invited us to both be counselors at an elementary church camp while we were. And so we both went there. And of course, that's when the sparks started flying. Brian was writing me poems on napkins,
At the church camp with all the kids around?
Yeah. It was an elementary church camp. So
perfect.
It was fun. He got my attention for sure. In fact, I remember one of the poems he wrote. He said, he would tease and say, hey, while the kids are taking their nap time, why don't you meet me, at the rec center and that kind of a thing, which we couldn't obviously leave our crew. But he wrote me a poem one time on a napkin that said, I've made a pass, I've made it twice. You've stood me up, and that's not nice. I'm sitting here eating my Raisin Bran. Tell me, woman, am I your man? So he got my attention with that. So you can see the rest is history. But Brian and I actually...
Did you keep that or did you just memorize it?
I do have it in a book up in the attic. So
have you framed it?
No.
That's frame worthy.
I haven't framed it. Probably should, but no. It's with just a memory book, a scrapbook that I have in the attic. But Brian and I, we dated long distance. We never lived in the same city until we got married. So it was kind of neat because while I was living in Chattanooga and going to college, he was at Asbury Seminary and we were 5 hours apart. Mm-hmm. And the year that he graduated from seminary and he took his first church in Joplin, Missouri, well, gosh, now we're 12 hours apart, but that's when my dad moved to Memphis. So we were still 7 hours apart. So it was kind of a blessing. So the relationship carried on. But we, after 3 years of dating, we got married on a very snowy, wintry day in December. Because we had an open invitation to Joplin First Church, which he was serving at, and we had an open invitation to Grace United Methodist Church here in Springfield, which is within driving distance. We were probably expecting about 400 at our wedding, and we had cake for 400 at our wedding, But that morning, we got married at 2, and that morning it just started, and we probably had about 5 inches of, Brian likes to call it Dippin' Dots, on the ground. In fact, people would say, we heard later that they took off from Springfield trying to get to the wedding, and they hit that storm and just turned around and came on home. Fortunately, all the family, grandparents and things like that were in town with us in Joplin. Mm-hmm. So we had about 90 at our wedding, and they actually put our cake in shoe boxes from my bridesmaids, and then whoever showed up to church the next morning, they were giving everybody cake to either eat or take home with them or whatever. So anyways, the fun didn't stop there because we left on our honeymoon, and Brian and I refer to it lovingly as the honeymoon from hell. And we figured if we could survive that week of marriage, then we'd be able to survive anything. So
okay, you got to describe what makes it the honeymoon from hell.
So I've already described the weather that we were facing on the day of the wedding. Brian and I left the wedding. I mean, it was funny because we got down to the reception hall and people were like, "Congratulations, good to see you," and we're leaving.
Yeah.
We really didn't get to spend a whole lot of time because everybody was ready to get on the road and get out of there, and we were too because we had to drive to Tulsa. We were going to spend the night in Tulsa and then fly through Dallas down to Akumal, which was about 60 miles south of Cancun. And so we chiseled his truck out and we drove to Tulsa, which is normally a 2-hour drive. Mm-hmm. But with the weather that day, because it had come through Oklahoma, it took us about 4 hours to get in to Tulsa. And of course, everything's closed down. And so, for our meal on our wedding night, the only thing that was open was Arby's. So we had our Arby's roast beef sandwiches and checked into the hotel. And when we left the next morning, at the Tulsa airport, everything's frozen. And so the hydraulic system on the luggage loader that loads all the luggage into the bottom of the airplane is frozen. And because of union regulations, the only one person that's operating that equipment is the only one that can hand load all the luggage. And so we are late leaving Tulsa. Brian and I land in Dallas. We are running through the airport. They had actually closed the doors. This is back in the days when they would still open it. We're like, wait, we're here. We knew our luggage wouldn't make it, but we were on the plane. We were good. We figured we'd catch up with our luggage later. And so we landed in Naku Mall and got to the resort and everything like that. And American Airlines pilots went on strike for 4 days. And so we're at a resort with winter clothes, 60 miles from, Cancun, the nearest city, and we have no luggage. So the guest relations people at the hotel resort were like feeling sorry for us, and they actually talked Mexicana Airlines which was our flight from Dallas down there, talked us into, or they gave us each like $150, which at the resort, I got a swimsuit, Brian got a swimsuit, we got flip-flops, shorts, and a T-shirt, and we lived in that for 4 days, But we had a good time. And then when we were snorkeling one day, Brian came up out of the water, and he's like, honey, I've lost my wedding ring. So I was like, well, that lasted long. I was like, but to his credit, he doesn't wear rings often. And so, and the water and all of that, snorkeling, I'm not surprised. But we got our luggage. The last 3 days we were there, we were changing clothes like for every occasion, every meal. And then when we got back into Tulsa, we chiseled out the truck because, it was like another winter storm had come through the following weekend. And we chiseled out the truck because it was not undercover at the airport parking. And we sat in there and listened to the radio, and we're like, are the roads going to be good? Are they not going to be good? And the guy on the radio kept saying, oh, the roads are good. They're all clear, So we decided, okay, we'll just go ahead and get on the road. And when we got on the highway, the turnpike, it was a solid sheet of ice. We were trying hard not to get the truck to, slide off the highway. So, and at one point in time, they actually closed the highway down. So we sat there for 3 hours, waiting for traffic to move again. So it took us 8 hours that time to get back. Wow. We got back at 3 a.m, and I was supposed to be at work at 6. And I called my boss, and she just laughed. She said, Cassie, nobody's been in all week. It's okay.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, good. So yeah, that was fun.
Sounds like a fun honeymoon.
Yeah.
Lots of memories. Never forgot.
It was good. We had some good times. The weather was good. The scenery was beautiful. We got to ride bikes and visit the Tulum ruins and things like that. So it was good. Brian and I lived in Joplin when we were first married. I mentioned he was the associate pastor at First United Methodist Church, and I was a computer programmer at the time for TAMCO. And we were there 3.5 years before Brian took a mid-year appointment, and we went to First United Methodist Church in Marionville, Missouri. So we were there for 4.5 years, and while we were there, we had our 2 children, Bethany and Kana. And they were just about to turn 4 and 2 years old when we moved to Wilmore, Kentucky. That's when Brian got accepted into the Beeson program at Asbury Seminary to work on his doctorate in ministry. And it's a year-long sabbatical that we took. So we said goodbye to Marionville after 4.5 years and went to Wilmore, and we were only there for a year. That's how long the programming was. But that was just an incredible year of education and travel and family time and community with other pastors and their wives. And it just was very affirming and strengthening, and it was good, after being in ministry for almost 10 years. So it was a good season. That was one of my favorite times of life, I think. Family life and that kind of stuff.
It's a fantastic season. And it's a gift that Ralph Waldo Beeson and Asbury Seminary have graciously given to many people.
And that's one of the things that I thought, it was just a year of grace. Why were we so fortunate to be chosen to be a part of this program, and to see these things and witness ministry and all that stuff. So it was good.
You got to travel with Brian a little bit in that year, right?
I did. I got to, I'm trying to think. I know I went to Seoul, Korea with him, which was eye-opening. I love to travel abroad. It's one of the things I enjoy most. I think it's just, I like to be immersed and experience other cultures. And so some of the things that stood out to me was their heart for God, the South Koreans, and their worship. I was amazed at when we went to visit Kwan Lim United Methodist Church and even Yoido Full Gospel Church, the number of people that were coming to church to worship. And we actually had to wait outside in, 40-degree temperatures, waiting for Yoido Full Gospel Church to empty out before we could go in and worship at another service, a second service. And it was like, the crowds were like the crowds people attend at athletic events in the Americas, and it's just like, oh, if we could get crowds like this to come to church, that would be amazing. And I was thinking too about my dad as we went to the demilitarized zone and we had to sign the waiver and sign our life away. I don't know if you got to do that or not, but I was thinking, my dad probably wouldn't like this real well that I'm standing at the DMZ. But what impressed me too about the South Koreans was that they were already working on their ministry and their missions, that if and when the opportunity should ever open up to go into North Korea, they were preparing and planning for that. So that was a neat takeaway from that trip as well. Well, upon completion of Brian's year-long course at Asbury Seminary, he was recruited by the Holston Conference of the United Methodist Church to do a church plant in Ooltewah, Tennessee. And so Ooltewah is just north of Chattanooga. So I feel like I was going back home. I mean, I never dreamed that Brian would take me back there, but the Lord did. So there we went. We planted a church, Brian did, called Lighthouse United Methodist Church. And it was a cold drop. I mean, it was just the two of us. There weren't any families in place. There weren't any other supportive churches in place. It was just, in fact, Brian looked at me and he said, you're going to be the children's director because you're cheap and available. I was like, okay, thank you. So it was interesting because he would know all of the adults because he'd be in service, but I was with all the kids and I knew all the kids. So it was good. And he had an office in our home. And fortunately, the Seventh-day Adventists in that community in Harrison, Tennessee, were very open to us, welcomed us in using their church building. They were just phenomenal supporters and neighbors. And so we used their building for a few years before moving into the girls' elementary school. And with that, ended up that we had a church trailer that Brian would go pull with his pickup truck every Sunday morning and go to the church early. And we had wonderful volunteers that would unload all the equipment and set up that, elementary school for worship. So they were, the people at Lighthouse, as I would say, some of them were unchurched, some of them were dischurched because something had happened that they were hurt or wounded and had been away from the church for a while. But in that congregation, they were such strong servants at heart and evangelists, and they were just on board with the ministry. And so the enthusiasm and the passion with something new and growing a church and that kind of stuff, we actually, the church was probably averaging about 120 in worship. And so that's when Brian got a call from a former colleague who was a senior pastor at a large church in Lexington, South Carolina. And so it was a very difficult decision to leave Lighthouse. And but we prayed about it, and we had signs that were confirming the decision. And so really when the girls were just about to start third grade and first grade, we moved to Lexington, South Carolina. And then fortunately, we were able to live there and serve that church until Bethany and Cana both graduated from high school and started college. So it was really a good season for them to be consistent and established in their growing up years. So there's, because of some special ministries and great friends, Mount Horeb United Methodist Church is also very near and dear to our hearts. Lexington was a very, and still is actually, a very fast-growing community. They were adding probably 600 students a year to the school population. And so we were building schools constantly. And actually, I asked Brian about because he was over evangelism at the church as the executive pastor, and we were averaging about 125 families joining the church a year. So it was a very busy season of ministry for us and for our family. One of the things that Mount Horeb did really well was Vacation Bible School. And when I say Vacation Bible School, I mean like Vacation Bible School on steroids. And we would usually get about 10 families a year, from Vacation Bible School. But it was just a culture there that had developed over the years. And so we had over 2,000 children register with over 800 volunteers serving. And it was a 1-week period, and we had 3 sessions. And so we went from 9 to noon, and then we turned around and we went from 1:30 to 4:30, and then we turned around and we went from 6 to 8:30. And I was blessed and so fortunate to be part of be one of the administrative directors, for just planning and organizing registration for 2,000 children and volunteering, and where they're going to volunteer, and volunteer training for 800 volunteers. And there were people who literally saved their vacation time at work to come serve VBS at Mount Horeb. It was just their what they wanted to do with their vacation. It kind of humbled me. I was like, I can think of better things to do with vacation. But anyways, I still think we could probably sing some of those Bible songs and find a few Bible buddies around the church here or there. But that was just an incredible time of ministry. I loved it.
I bet you felt like taking a month off after that.
I don't think so. No, because I am very detail oriented, gifted with administration, and so I thrived on that kind of stuff. So yeah, it was fun, and especially as the Bethany and Cana aged, and they were participating and helping too. And I mean, we all had our VBS T-shirts, and it went into the laundry every night at 9 o'clock so that it was clean for 8 o'clock in the next morning. And Brian, took it seriously to be an example of volunteering. So he was out in the parking lot during our morning service, which was the busiest time, and then he served as a crew guide. Because we needed crew leaders so desperately. And that's the beauty of the ministry, is that of witnessing God's numbers with math, because we would just be trying to figure out, do we have enough volunteers to allow these 12 more kids to be a part of a crew, or these 12 more kids to be a part of a crew. And the culture there too was that, we had people joining our Vacation Bible School all week long. So like the very first day, we could add about 200 kids. And in that moment at the registration desk up front in the lobby of the church, and I'd have like four or five volunteers lined up with all their paperwork in front of them, so they knew what crews were open, and we had name tags ready. And because you really had to get those kids assigned to a crew and taken into the sanctuary to meet their crew during the 15 minutes of opening worship before they started scattering all over the campus. So to get, that many kids, a couple hundred kids registered and in 15 minutes in the sanctuary was crazy. And then you've got things to consider like their allergies. And so we had a nursing station, and we had to update the nursing station in real time of these kids with their allergies and who had EpiPens or things like that. And the kitchen crew, because they're preparing all the snacks, and they had allergy lists and whatnot. So I loved it, as you can tell. I did. I loved it.
I've seen something similar to that, but not quite to 2,000 plus kids.
Yeah.
I can imagine.
Yeah. It was, they do it well. They do it well at Mount Horeb. So anyways, but we were there for 13 years. And then Brian requested a new appointment. And so in the June of 2016, we moved to a small town called Prosperity, South Carolina. It was about 45 minutes away. And this was a church that was in crisis, needing some healing and strong leadership. They had a beloved pastor who had been there and grew the church to about 450. And then the pastor that followed him had a moral failing. And the church was without a pastor for 8 months. The district superintendent filled in, and they just dropped like 250 people, And so Brian and I arrived. I will say the ministry was challenging at times, but the people were awesome. They were great. And under Brian's leadership, the church did stabilize. It became healthier and started growing again slightly for, a small town. And we've got, some lasting friendships from that little small town called Prosperity. But we were only there for 4 years. So that really, in March of 2020, Brian and I decided, Brian decided to retire early. And the churches were all shut down because of COVID for at least 2 weeks, we knew, through the bishop's directive. And we looked at each other and we were like, well, we're not doing anything for 2 weeks. Let's drive over to Springfield and go look at houses, So we came over here and we found a house and we closed on it in May of 2020. And Brian was here for a week, and then he had to go back and finish up his appointment. And then I went back the last 3 weeks of June and loaded another truckload and said goodbye to everybody, and officially all moved in. Brian joined me, the end of June 2020. So we've been in Springfield since then. He, in retirement, has really enjoyed working with the Springfield Cardinals on their field crew. He just, he loves baseball, and he loves showing up and not having responsibility, so to speak, as far as like meetings and being in leadership and planning and that kind of stuff. But I think he is also enjoying a connection with some of the young people on the field crew. It's almost as if God has given him a new ministry, because they'll ask questions of faith, or they'll ask questions about relationships or finding a church or finances, or he's like the dad on the team, but not their dad. And so he's enjoying making connections with a lot of them. In fact, he's currently leading a Bible study. One of the young men that he works with is also a baseball player for the Missouri State Bears baseball team. And so he's doing a Bible study with about 6 of the baseball team members on Nehemiah, taking them through some leadership training. So he loves that. And being a retired minister, you get tapped on the shoulder a lot of times. Oh, you're available. Can you fill in this pulpit? And so he has been blessed to serve 2 churches since we've been back. Both of them almost a year long, I would say. And I think it was neat how God bookended his career, because he finished with a church that started it all. First United Methodist Church in Joplin. And he was back in the same office, working with some of the same people. And it was just feel good for him to be able to do that and get them through a season of transition. until and he felt really good in both churches handing off the baton to somebody that was coming in permanent full time. And so I think it was good closure for him to his career as a pastor. So,
what have you done since you've returned to Springfield?
We moved into a really great neighborhood. In fact, one of the friends that we knew from here, she's like, "Oh, you just moved into the best neighborhood." There is a group of probably about 25 of us in the neighborhood. We live in a pretty large neighborhood, but there's 25 women, and we kind of are all connected where we play mahjong once a week.
Mahjong?
Mahjong.
What is that?
It's a Chinese tile game. You're not matching tiles, and they're not disappearing like they do on the game on your phone, like American mahjong. We actually have a card that has a lot of different hands on it that you can make with your 13 tiles. And so they have 3 suits, like dots and cracks and bams. And then they have winds and they have dragons. And you just make combinations based on the mahjong card, and the official mahjong card in front of you. So it's fun, something to exercise the brain.
Okay.
So we also play bunko once a month. Do you know what bunko is?
I've only heard of it in passing. It's another card game, right?
No, it's not a card game. We're just rolling dice.
Okay.
We're just rolling dice and counting how many times, I think you work your way up from rolling 1s, 2s, up to 6s, and then you work your way back down to rolling 1s again. And you count how many times you roll. Okay. So it's fun. And you get money. And you can get money if you lose or win. There's a lot of different ways to.
Who provides the money?
We all do.
Okay. Yeah, where's the money come from?
We pay $10 to play. And, so it's always fun when you at least get your $10 back. It's like, okay, that worked. But and then the same group of ladies, we get together and celebrate each other's birthdays. And so once every other month or once a quarter, we've had luncheons. We kind of book a room at a restaurant and we just go out and celebrate each other's birthday lunches. I've never experienced a sense of community in a neighborhood like I have here. And then we have also play pickleball. So there's a group of us that play pickleball 3 times a week. So I love that. I love that.
Did you ever go back to work?
After Tamco in Joplin. Yeah. So yes, I worked off and on throughout the years. I think being a mother was my primary purpose. And I always had the sense of Brian's job was busy and stressful enough, and sometimes you couldn't necessarily control schedules. And so I kind of wanted to just not be so preoccupied or busy with a career that the house was stressful, with the kids coming and going in their directions and Brian coming and going in his directions. I mean, I cleaned the house, I cooked, I shopped, I paid the bills, did the taxes, did the yard, so that when they were home, it was almost like there wasn't a whole lot that they needed to do because I had taken care of it. But after Tamco, in Marionville, I worked at a gift shop. I had just had Bethany and Cana, and they were young, and this gift shop owner was in our church, and she just needed a lunch break. And so I would go over and work her gift shop for an hour and a half while she went home, put her feet up, and had lunch. And I'd set out new things in her store and dust and check people out, that kind of thing. And then over the years, I have worked as a receptionist at a vet clinic, which I absolutely loved because I'm an animal person. And then I was, when the girls were in school, substituting at their schools for a little bit. And then when we were in Lexington, I got called to be a long-term sub as a secretary for special services. And so I did that for 2 years, and that kind of landed my next little job where the speech language pathologist that I was working with started her own private practice and wanted me to run the office for her. And that was just an incredible year because neither of us knew anything about running a business, a private practice, billing insurance companies, And so we learned a lot. I started there like 2 days a week, which was perfect. But after 3 years, it went to full time. And I was like, yeah, I can't do full time. It's too much, Bethany and Kana were teenagers and had a lot going on. And I was like, my attention needs to be focused. And then my last job was actually after they were in college, and I was the assistant director of a preschool in Lexington for 2 years before we moved to Prosperity. So I chose not to drive back the 45 minutes to the little preschool job. It was just 3 days a week, and it wouldn't have covered the gas and wear and tear on the car, So, and I tend to, as you know, through my history, as often as I have moved, I tend to try to just leave and cleave to the new place that I'm at. I don't know if that's a coping mechanism or what, because it's hard to say goodbye to people.
It is. Yeah, it's hard to say goodbye.
So I did not work while we were in Prosperity, and I haven't worked here. So,
do you ever think you will?
I have tried a few times, but nothing has worked out. I don't know if that's just the gap in work history, and that it seems so sporadic and so varied. Like I didn't ever stick with one particular job, so to speak. But I don't know. The opportunity has just not ever come and said yes. I take that back. I did work temporarily, seasonally, when we were in Prosperity, but it was not in Prosperity. I actually worked for Samaritan's Purse. In 2018, I went up to Charlotte and was a team coach, and I worked in their processing center, processing all the shoe boxes with volunteers.
Yeah.
And that just opened my eyes to that ministry. And then the second year, in 2019, I went as an administrative assistant and worked with the management team in the Atlanta Processing Center. And so Kana had started her master's degree at Kennesaw State. And so I was able to sleep on an air mattress in her living room in her apartment for 3 months while I, worked at Samaritan's Purse. So I did do that. So those were Samaritan's Purse was my last 2 jobs, basically. Yeah.
So let's maybe, do you have more you want to cover?
No, the last thing that I was just going to share really is after moving here, Brian said I could pick where we went to church. Oh. After following him, 30 plus years around ministry, he's like, you get to choose. And so, I chose Schweitzer, primarily because my mother-in-law here goes here too. But then in coming, I just loved the teaching and the preaching and the staff and the environment. And I will say that through the years of ministry, I've learned for me that it's best to volunteer in one leadership position that kind of requires outside preparation or study time. It's typically a longer term commitment. So like right now I'm teaching women's Wednesday night Bible studies. And so it takes time to do your homework every week and then preview the video. And I do some pretty extensive note taking for the videos, and I type that all up and give it to the women so that they can focus on the video and not be trying to take notes and miss something. And then I typically try to find other things that are short-term, easy to plug into. So like kids check in and work in the blue booth and help them with the Christmas market at the church that are temporary and don't require, a lot of outside time, but yet are much needed. So I appreciate that. But I'd say that just allows me the time to have what I call a ministry of availability. I've learned, I can think of probably 3 particular occasions where I actually felt the call of the Holy Spirit and I was available to answer that call in small and simple ways. But it really helped the people that I was available to help, And so that's what I like to have is what I call a ministry of just being available. Because at this day and age, and people are so busy with jobs and their own volunteer commitments or their kids and that kind of stuff that sometimes, they don't have that time right now to do things that come up.
Right.
Because you can still be very committed as a volunteer too and keep yourself really, really busy.
Oh, yeah.
And so I've been blessed to be able to help some people with some things.
I've got 4 more questions for you.
Okay. I hope I have answers for you.
You'll have answers. First question. And so one of these is like vocational stuff about when you guys were doing the church planting season. How many years was that?
We were in Chattanooga for 4 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
What are a couple of lessons you learned out of that experience that like about yourself? What are a couple of things you learned about yourself? Because for most people, church planting, they may not know this. I mean, but when you described like a parachute drop, you get dropped in. I mean, you've got to really, it's you two and your kids, and it is tough work. So you find out a lot about yourself in that moment in time.
Therefore, by the grace of God, go I. Yeah. So yeah, one thing that comes to mind, I told you that I was the children's director and Brian the pastor, and his office was in the house, and church was stored in our house, and it was a lot of church. And I think Brian and I just learned for ourselves and our relationship that we probably don't need to work together. And I don't mean that it was really bad or anything like that. It was just, that is not our strong suit, Mm-hmm. And so we actually had somebody else from the church then take over the role as children's ministry director. And so that was a early on takeaway, I guess, in our marriage. Really, after 10 years of marriage, it was like, let's not do this again. This isn't good for us to work together like this. As you say, the stress of church planting is crazy. And I don't, this is not necessarily a positive thing, but another thing you learned is sometimes how competitive churches can be. So like I said, the Seventh-day Adventist Church was very supportive and welcoming of us. We couldn't get the other Methodist churches necessarily to send us musicians to have a worship service with on a temporary basis, or send us a volunteer on a temporary basis to work with kids ministry or something like that, so that we could provide those things. And so you learn to manage as best you can. And there were people that did step up, but it was tough. It was like, wait, aren't we all on the same team? Aren't we in this together? Why are you not supporting this? We're, but anyways, and I think just the hard work, the perseverance, pushing through, and just seeing the love of the people wanting to share the good news. We would make floats and go to parades and have our banners, to advertise the church. We'd be at the post office handing out cups with our name on it with little flowers planted in it, and to see the children participating and giving in it too. It was an all hands on deck. That was phenomenal. And in church planting too, that people come there because they like you. They like your product, what you're offering, what you're worshiping. So there's a greater sense of family, I think, in that kind of environment and situation. That was really a blessing. That's why it was so hard to make the decision to leave them. So, yeah.
Well, if you want to do it again, I know somebody. Anyway.
Okay.
Okay. Second question. You talked early on about your early life, about some memorable things you did with your sister and your dad. You mentioned your dad and that. Have you got a couple memorable things that you kind of hold dear that you did with your kids when they were little and growing up?
We have had a Christmas tradition I don't know how it came about, but we had developed quite a collection of nativity sets. And so, in fact, like one of the ladies from Lighthouse in Chattanooga she was a manager for Toys R Us, and she gave us a Playmobil, nativity set. So, but anyways, and we inherited some and bought some over the years, and we just started with Bethany and Cana, that on Christmas morning, before we opened presents, we had to hunt for baby Jesus. And so we would hide all of the Jesuses from the nativities around the house that morning. And then, they'd go find them. And as they got older, then it became, they'd hide them, and Brian and I would look for them. So anyways, that's a memory that I hold dear. I think when they were younger, I absolutely loved the moments of just like sitting on the couch and reading storybooks to them. I loved that time, or playing games with them. And especially, I know a lot of moms don't like to do that pretend play, but I kind of got into it with my kids.
Okay.
They loved to play Santa Claus, and we'd be down in the basement, and I'd be Santa Claus, and one would be the reindeer, and one would be the elf, and we'd, distribute toys all around the room. So enjoyed that. And then, with Brian's schedule and working on the weekends, vacations were important. He put a lot of his energy into vacations, more so than a day-to-day or a weekly or a monthly type of time with the family. And so we did a lot of Disney vacations. And so I've got a collection of Disney picture frames, and from all the years that we went. And so, and we did some pretty special things. I remember one year doing the dinner at Cinderella's castle, which was magical, In fact, we went in that night. We always went down to Florida in February. It was easy to take the kids out of school in elementary school. And then we would do Disney for 4 or 5 days. And then we would go over and see his mom and stepdad as they were wintering down in Florida. And it was a good way to get in to see them. And so we would always be there in winter. But when we went in for dinner, basically the parade had just finished, or people were at the parade. And so we actually, we were like, well, we still have time. Let's see if there's any rides open, and Pirates of the Caribbean was open. And I just remember we just walked straight through, nobody was in line. We were the only one in the boat. We were the only one going through the rides at the time, and they actually closed the doors behind us, but it was like, how cool is this to get to ride a Disney World ride all by yourself with your family, So those were special moments. And then we got to be like in a parade at the Animal Kingdom one day. And Bethany and Cana got to open the park one day and spread pixie dust in the air. And so good, fun memories like that.
Yeah. Third question out of 4.
Okay.
What are you looking forward to? What's on the horizon that you're passionate about, interested in, planning for?
I think maybe retirement for Brian a second time. He loves the ball team and the ball field, and it can keep him pretty busy, during the season. But he and I love to travel. And so, we'd like to go to Alaska. I'd like to go to Australia. And so I would like to, and just, travel around the United States and travel to see our kids and my family and that kind of stuff. So look forward to just really trying to figure out what retirement looks like with him.
All right.
So anyways.
Well, and the last question, and this is a question that I asked a lot of different people. Like, what's a word of advice or a piece of final wisdom that you'd like to leave with us? Maybe there's something that was shared with you that's been really valuable to you.
I think, as I thought about it, sage piece of advice that I would leave people is don't make comparisons of yourself with others. It's something that I have struggled with in my life. And I think when we make comparisons of ourselves with others, it can really rob our joy and our identity and our worth of who we are and who God created us to be. And so rather than looking from side to side for, am I good? Am I doing the right things? Am I, standing out or whatever? Look up, and just let him guide and direct, and just avoid those comparisons altogether, because they just rob and steal you of joy. Yeah. So
comparison, they say, is the thief of joy.
I believe it.
Yeah.
Do you know who said it?
I don't.
Oh, okay.
I've heard it recently on a couple of different podcasts I listened to, but I've heard that recently. So
yeah. Well, I can testify.
Yeah.
Testify to it. So, yeah.
Well, Cassie, thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for coming in, and it's been fun.
Thank you.
Yep. Well, a big thank you to Cassie for sharing her story. In listening today, I hope you found yourself encouraged, inspired, and challenged, and that you begin to behold the really cool people who are around you. The Really Cool People podcast is produced by Schweitzer Church, Springfield, Missouri. Taylor Likes is our executive producer and editor, and I'm your host, Jason Leininger. You can help us by liking, reviewing, and sharing this podcast. Until next time, stay cool.